All right, guys. So, as many of you know, as I've been playing these replays, I'm not using the real life as played schedule or the real life lineups, but I have been using real life transactions, and I do think that it's probably something interesting to talk about here. If you watched this morning's video, you know about this already. So, the problem that the Philadelphia Athletics had this morning is that they don't have a heck of a lot of pitchers on their roster. And we'll take just a quick look here at part of their real-life transaction log, which I was just sort of studying. So really the problem that they have here is that Dick Fowler, starting pitcher, and also Bobby Shantz, both are on the day-to-day list, which means that they're just not available. We're going to have McCann on that list as well. Fowler comes back on the 25th, and then Shantz on the 30th, right? So it's not long enough for one of those long-term transactions, and they didn't bring up any different players to compensate. It's kind of important to do that because that helps us sort of get an idea of what the managers in real life had to deal with and what kind of problems existed, and it's more like a real major league season. Now, Diamond Baseball, like other games, has a injury mode. It has injuries built in, right? You can play the game with injuries on. It will give you realistic injuries, at least according to whatever the injury rating is for each player. But there's some problems you have with it. The biggest problem, as I'll show you here in a second, is that if you're going to do it that way, you have to make roster moves yourself for every single team by hand, and the system's not really well designed for that. So that's something to keep in mind. But as this is set up here, it's not really necessarily the end of the world for the Athletics, but it might be. I'll show you here. So if you remember, they only have 7 active pitchers on the roster. In a couple of days, it's going to be 6. What did we say is like the 28th or the 27th that the other starter comes back, right? So you have a game on the 23rd, a game on the 24th, a game on the 25th, and that looks like that's it. The rest days on the 26th. And then they're playing in New York at the Yankees starting on the 27th. So you have 1, 2, 3 more games to go, and then you have the big Yankee series. I don't know who the Athletics are going to start for these 3 games, but it's going to be a little bit dicey, a little bit tricky because they just don't have enough pitchers on the bench, right? Now, how did this work in real life is really the question that we should be asking ourselves, right? And the truth is that I don't fully know the answer, right? We can look at box scores and we can kind of reconstruct maybe what happened in real life. Remember, Connie Mack is still alive then. It's every bit possible that Mack was hoping that he could find like a pitcher to pitch one of these extra games here or there from, local sandlots or something. Because we know that's what Connie Mack did for most of his career. In fact, I've mentioned this book before, but if you have the time, you need to go check out Norman Mach's book on Connie Mack, all 3 of them. It's a great series, and what you'll learn from it is that Connie Mack had this tendency throughout his entire career, going all the way back to managing Milwaukee in the old Western League, to go check out like what players he could bring in on trial to fill some of these holes that he has up, right? One of the most famous examples of this for people who play replays is 1919, where the Athletics had a roster overall in the season of 40-something players. It was the record in the major leagues for a long time, up until really the 90s came along, and all of the developments in free agency and so on created this incentive we see now for teams to constantly have players sort of going in and out from AAA to the majors or AA to the majors, right? Before then, it really wasn't that common to have that sort of shuffle, and so as a result, that 1919 Athletics team had a really unusually large roster, and they did so because Connie Mack thought for certain that he was going to find the next great player on one of these sandlots or whatever, and he would hire these guys to trial his contracts, have them pitch or play like 1 or 2 games, and then decide they were no good and go find another kid, right? My guess is that that's probably what's happening in 1949. That probably would be the realistic way to handle the situation. Unfortunately, we can't really do that in Diamond Mine Baseball because it's not that easy to make like fictional players for like no reason. The other difficulty we have is that coverage in the newspapers of the 1949 Philadelphia Athletics wasn't really that great. Right? They suffered from being in a 2-team town. Phillies weren't that great either, but because they're in a 2-team town, you don't see the same attention paid to each team as you do in most 1-team cities. The one exception to that I can tell really is actually Chicago, not New York, because in Chicago, baseball became a really, really big thing, in the going all the way back to the early 1910s, if not before then. And so there was a lot more coverage there and very good coverage of the Cubs and White Sox. But by this time, 49, especially in Philadelphia, I mean, both of the teams were kind of down in the dumps. And, it wasn't, you won't find all sorts of great coverage of, this is exactly how many players the Athletics have on the roster and stuff like that, the stuff that we would really want. So that's one of the things that's tricky. That kind of puts us into a weird box, right? Where as long as we're playing with games that don't have a great general manager model, we kind of have to use real life transactions. Even if you come up and say, well, what about OOTP? OOTP has a problem. The problem is that if you allow yourself to handle this situation the right way and go look into whatever farm system the Athletics had and pull some pictures up, you also have to give the computer manager the option to do that with all the other teams in the league. And what that does mean is that you might get some misbalanced teams. You'll definitely see Don Newcomb on the Dodgers from the start of the season instead of having him wait a couple of weeks like he did in real life. There's a lot of stuff that comes up that's counterfactual, including weird decisions sometimes by the computer manager based upon the ratings that in OOTP can feel arbitrary from time to time. And so there's a big question as to whether that really is realistic. I mean, even in the sense of like what happened in real life and the way that roster movements worked in real life, there still is a question as to, like, for example, whether the computer's managing like the Cincinnati Reds or something and their farm system the way that they were managed in 1949. My point with that is that OOTP gives you the option to use minor league players, including real life minor leaguers and even fictional minor leaguers, to kind of fill in the hole. But if you do that, you have to take everything that comes with it, which includes things that will probably make your replay be totally offset and give you some really weird results. So keep that in mind. Now, I was going to show you the other thing here, which is how it works with Diamond Mine Baseball when we decide to go ahead and change the rosters as if we were going to manage the roster for every single team. And this is the problem. You have to go to Roster Manager Profile, and then you go, say, for example, the Philadelphia Athletics. And here you have the team, and the way to change anything is you right-click on them, and you can, sign the player who's already on the team. I don't know why that's an option. You can release him, you can promote him or farm him. You're probably not going to release this guy. You're probably going to either promote or farm him. You can also activate him off of the injured list, and you can do all sorts of stuff like that in there. Now, Diamond Mine does not do a very good job of necessarily like enforcing the rules. And so, what happens is you can have a roster that's more than 24 guys. You can have a roster that's much higher than that if you really want to. It's not really going to do too much to stop you. It's not like OTP where there is a mechanism in there to stop you from doing that. As you can see here on this roster, there just isn't a whole ton of players on the 1949 Athletics in general, right? The way that this works in Diamond Mine is it will have duplicate records for each player. So, for example, in real life, see if I remember this, Peanuts Lowry went to a different team. I can't remember which team he goes to in real life. Anyway, but he has a record both for the Cubs and for his other team. In fact, the place I can show this to you is if we go over, it's stupid that you have to go to so many different players, but if you go over to the organizer and go over to players and then scroll on down to Lowry, here he is. Peanuts Lowry was also on the Cincinnati Reds, right? He hasn't gone there yet, but he's going to go there eventually. Diamond Mine will have two records for him, one for his time in the Cubs, one for his time with the Reds. And then there's this one here that you can use if you're willing to go through all the effort of setting this up like by hand, which nobody who plays this game does. Or if you're playing in a draft league, that's where it comes in handy, where you have his overall record on both teams. So again, if we go over to the roster manager profile for the Cincinnati Reds, what you can see here is that Peanuts Lowry shows up here, but he shows up as green because he's on the farm. The truth is he's not in the farm system. He just hasn't come over to the team yet. So that's kind of the way that Diamond Mine handles this. That's all well and good, right? But if you're trying to do this by hand, you've got to go through this for every single team. You've got to make sure that this stuff here adds up. This isn't really all that well organized. You can click to arrange it alphabetically, which I consider to be a little bit easier. But then again, it's still kind of hard. I mean, it'll tell you down here how many pitchers you have, but it won't tell you your balance between starters and relievers. You kind of have to go over here to make your decision. You can tell the game if you want the guy to be a starter or reliever and put him in the proper place and stuff. It's all creative for draft leagues. But doing this roster and this management for one team at Diamond Mine Baseball is feasible. You could do it that way. But the problem is, if you take off transactions, the computer can't do it for other teams. So your choice as a replayer is to do transactions for every team by hand, or to have, real life transactions used, basically do it the way that I'm doing it. And that's the reason why I do it this way. So there you go. I would really be interested actually in knowing what you think and what your experience is with various games, whether you tend to use transactions or whether you kind of come up with your own, or what it is that you think works the best. I will tell you this. I think it depends on the season, right? So if I'm going to play a season like 1981 or 1994, in which things are not as, or the season was not completed in real life, and we have to stop halfway. We want to definitely avoid that because that doesn't make for much fun in a replay. If we're going to play with a season like that, I'm going to have to figure out what to do with transactions to get certain things to happen to certain guys, right? You have to ask yourself, like, if you play 94, what do you do with, I think it was Craig Biggio, who ended up injured right before the strike, right? Well, what do you do with him afterwards? How long is he out? Or do you just reactivate him, and who comes in to play for him and stuff like that? It's a lot more complicated than you think, and this is really the sort of thing that you should keep in mind when you're planning your project. But whatever you do, please do not have a 1994 replay that's only as played and you don't play the other games. That would be boring, right? You want to have fun with it. If you're going to play 1981, make it so that you play the full season. Don't have the stupid split season. We don't like that. We want to have the full thing happen. But let me know what you think and what your plan is if you have a project like that going on. I'll talk with you later. Bye.